Don't waste your time with that old fool. He's completely useless. The harsh criticism echoed through the forest as the elderly veteran trembled, struggling to stand firm. The young seal didn't respond, didn't argue back. He simply remained silent and continued helping the old man move forward. 24 hours later, a military aircraft landed in the middle of the wilderness. The same group who had mocked them now stood frozen, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Imagine if you witnessed that scene. Would you stop to help, or would you simply walk away? Jack Reynolds was 42 years old, a former Navy SEAL who had chosen the deep forest as his sanctuary. After years of intense military service, he needed this quiet solitude to find peace within himself. During one of his regular hikes along the forgotten mountain trails, Jack discovered something unexpected. An elderly man sat collapsed against a massive oak tree, breathing heavily and clearly exhausted. His weathered face showed determination mixed with defeat. "Sir, are you all right?" Jack approached carefully, his training making him assess the situation quickly. The old man looked up with tired but proud eyes. "Name's George Winters. Served in Korea, back when men knew what duty meant." His voice carried the weight of decades and countless untold stories. George explained his mission with trembling hands. He wasn't lost by accident. He had deliberately come to this remote area, searching for the exact location where his unit had trained before shipping out to Korea in 1950. This wasn't about reliving past glory or seeking attention. This was his final pilgrimage, a quiet goodbye to memories that had shaped his entire life. Jack didn't ask too many questions. He understood that some journeys are deeply personal. Instead, he simply offered his water bottle and said, "Mind if I walk with you for a while?" The elderly veteran's hands shook as he accepted the water, but he maintained his military posture as best he could. Even after all these years, even in his weakened state, the soldier's instinct remained strong in his blood. His back stayed as straight as possible, his eyes alert despite his exhaustion. "You don't have to help an old man like me," George said quietly. "I'm sure you have more important things to do." Jack adjusted his backpack and smiled. "Actually, sir, this is exactly where I need to be right now." As they began walking together along the narrow forest path, Jack noticed how George's breathing was labored but determined. Every step seemed to cost him effort, yet he refused to complain or ask for additional help beyond what was offered. As they slowly made their way down the mountain trail, they encountered a group of young, wealthy tourists from the city. These were the type of people who came to the wilderness with expensive gear and loud voices, treating nature like their personal playground. Brad, their obvious leader, wore designer hiking boots that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked at George with obvious disdain and started laughing with his friends. "Look at this old-timer struggling up here. What are you supposed to be, soldier? From the Civil War, maybe?" Brad's voice dripped with mockery and cruel amusement. His friends joined in the laughter, taking photos and making jokes about the ancient warrior they'd discovered in the woods. They acted as if George was some kind of museum exhibit, rather than a human being deserving of basic respect. Jack stepped forward, keeping his voice calm and respectful despite his growing anger. "Excuse me, but this gentleman served our country with honor. He's trying to reach a specific location that has personal significance." "Oh, so now we have two heroes," Brad continued his taunting. "Let me guess. You're probably some weekend warrior pretending to be tough out here in the woods?" George felt the sting of humiliation deep in his chest. The disrespect wasn't just directed at him personally. It was an insult to everyone who had ever worn the uniform and sacrificed for their country. "Jack, maybe you should go ahead without me," George suggested quietly. not wanting to burden this kind stranger with his problems. Jack looked directly at the old veteran, then back at the mocking group. His voice remained steady and strong. "We're walking together, sir. That's how soldiers do things. We don't leave anyone behind." The group continued their cruel laughter as they passed by, but Jack's resolve only grew stronger. About an hour later, George began showing serious signs of dehydration and exhaustion. His steps became increasingly unsteady, and sweat poured down his face, despite the cool mountain air. Jack immediately shared his last remaining water, giving George the larger portion without hesitation. Unfortunately, their path crossed with Brad's group once again. This time, the young man noticed Jack's empty water bottle and George's obvious distress. Instead of offering help, Brad saw an opportunity for more cruelty. "Oh, look! The war heroes are thirsty," Brad announced loudly to his friends. He pulled out his expensive stainless steel canteen full of fresh, clean water. George looked up hopefully, thinking perhaps the young man had reconsidered his earlier behavior. Maybe he would show some basic human compassion. Instead, Brad slowly unscrewed the cap and deliberately poured the entire contents onto the ground right in front of them. The precious water soaked into the dirt while George and Jack watched in stunned silence. "Oops, sorry about that. Guess you'll have to find water somewhere else," Brad said with a smirk. George slowly sat down on a nearby rock, his shoulders sagging with defeat. The physical exhaustion was bad enough, but this deliberate humiliation cut much deeper. It wasn't about the water anymore. It was about being treated as less than human. Jack felt rage building inside him, but he maintained his composure. He quietly picked up his empty bottle, gently helped George stand up, and said simply, "Come on, sir. We'll find what we need up ahead." The group walked away laughing, completely unaware of the gravity of their actions and the dignity of the man they had just insulted. As evening approached, Jack found a sheltered spot beneath a rocky overhang where they could rest safely for the night. George's breathing had become increasingly labored, and Jack was genuinely worried about the older man's condition. Jack efficiently built a small fire using his survival training, creating warmth and light in their temporary refuge. George sat quietly, staring into the flames with distant eyes that seemed to be seeing memories from decades past. Just as Jack was preparing a simple meal from his emergency rations, footsteps approached their campsite. Both men looked up to see a lone figure emerging from the darkness beyond their fire's glow. "Excuse me," the young man called out politely. "I saw your fire and hoped I could introduce myself properly." It was Michael, one of the members from Brad's group, but his demeanor was completely different now. Respectful, almost reverent. He approached slowly, hands visible, in the universal gesture of peaceful intentions. "My name is Michael Thompson. I'm a former Army Ranger, and I owe you both a sincere apology for my friend's behavior today." Jack studied the young man carefully, his SEAL training making him assess threats and sincerity simultaneously. Something in Michael's voice and posture suggested genuine remorse. "I recognized you earlier, sir," Michael continued, addressing Jack directly. "You're Jack Reynolds, aren't you? You led Operation Shadowfall 3 years ago, saved 16 soldiers who were trapped behind enemy lines." Jack nodded slowly, surprised to be recognized in this remote location. His military service was something he rarely discussed, especially the classified operations that had earned him his reputation. Michael then turned to George with obvious respect. "And you, sir, if I'm not mistaken, you served at Frozen Chosen during the Korean War? That was one of the most brutal battles in American military history." George's eyes widened slightly. It had been years since anyone recognized the significance of that campaign, much less showed him respect for surviving it. "My grandfather served in Korea, too," Michael explained. "He told me stories about men like you, heroes who held the line when everything seemed hopeless." The next morning brought an unexpected development. Michael returned to their campsite, but this time he wasn't alone. The entire group, including Brad, followed behind him with noticeably different attitudes. Brad's arrogant swagger had been replaced by obvious discomfort and shame. His expensive gear seemed less impressive now, and his confident smirk had completely disappeared. Michael stepped forward to address both Jack and George formally. "Gentlemen, I spent last night educating my friends about exactly who you both are and what you've accomplished in service to our country." He turned to face his companions, making sure they understood the gravity of the situation. "Jack Reynolds here isn't just any former SEAL. He's a decorated hero who risked his life repeatedly to save others. Operation Shadowfall was one of the most dangerous rescue missions in recent military history." The group listened in stunned silence as Michael continued his explanation. "And George Winters survived the Chosin Reservoir campaign, where American forces were outnumbered 10-1 by Chinese troops in sub-zero temperatures. These men held their positions for weeks against impossible odds, allowing thousands of other soldiers to escape safely." Brad stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, we had no idea. What we did yesterday was inexcusable." George slowly stood up, drawing on reserves of strength and dignity that had sustained him through decades of challenges. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had faced death and emerged victorious. "Young man, ignorance isn't an excuse for cruelty, but recognizing your mistakes and making amends, that shows character." The group stood in respectful silence, finally understanding the magnitude of their earlier behavior and the caliber of men they had insulted. As dawn broke over the mountain wilderness, an unexpected sound echoed through the forest. The distinctive whop-whop-whop of military helicopter rotors grew steadily louder, causing everyone in the camp to look up in surprise and confusion. Within minutes, a military helicopter appeared overhead, circling the area before finding a suitable landing spot in a nearby clearing. The powerful downdraft from its rotors sent leaves and debris swirling through the air. Two uniformed officers emerged from the aircraft and approached their campsite with purposeful strides. Their dress uniforms were immaculate, and their bearing unmistakably military. The senior officer, a colonel by his insignia, walked directly to George and rendered a crisp, respectful salute. "General Winters, sir. We've been ordered to escort you home." The entire tourist group froze in complete shock. General Winters? The old man they had mocked and humiliated was actually a retired general? George slowly returned the salute with hands that no longer trembled. For the first time since they'd met him, he stood with the full bearing and dignity of his rank and experience. The transformation was remarkable and humbling to witness. "Thank you, Colonel," George replied with quiet authority. "But first, I need to properly thank this young man who helped me complete my mission." He turned to Jack with genuine gratitude shining in his eyes. "Son, without your assistance and respect, I never would have made it to the place I needed to see. You reminded me that honor still exists in this world." Jack stood at attention and saluted his superior officer. "It was my privilege, General. Any soldier would have done the same." Brad approached hesitantly, his face pale with shame and realization. "General Winters, sir, I'm deeply sorry for how we treated you. There's no excuse for our behavior." George looked at the young man for a long moment before responding. Apology accepted, son. Just remember this lesson. True respect doesn't require titles, medals, or public recognition. It requires a heart willing to see value in every person, even when they're silent, forgotten, or seemingly unremarkable. One act of kindness at the right moment can provide crucial support to someone who once carried the weight of protecting entire units of soldiers. Honor means doing what's right, regardless of whether anyone is watching or applauding. It means treating every person with dignity, because you never know what battles they've fought or what sacrifices they've made for others. Character is revealed not in moments of glory, but in quiet acts of compassion toward those who seem to have nothing left to offer. How will you treat the anonymous person you meet today? Because they might be the very reason you're able to live in peace and freedom. If you believe respect never goes out of style, remember George's story. Never turn away when someone needs your voice to defend their dignity,